In what way does Brexit worry you, and what needs to be sorted out so that those worries eventually disappear? So we're trying to identify at a very high level what are the things that you're most concerned about in each of you in the area of work that you're dealing with, and I'll start with you, Mr. Lawrence.
Okay, for the space sector, I think the biggest worry is our ability as UK industry to access future EU space programmes, particularly the Galileo, Copernicus and space surveillance and tracking programmes. Historically, UK has played a big role in these programmes and wishes to do so in the future. There is still some uncertainty about how exactly that will be carried out.
Now, there are reports that the EU has said to British companies, if you're doing work on some of these contracts in respect of Galileo, that you won't be able to do that anymore after we have left. Are you aware of companies being told that?
There is certainly a lack of clarity. Some statements at a high level indicate that UK companies will be able to participate, but there is no firm agreement. So that uncertainty means that when people are looking at the long-term plans, it's hard to see exactly how the UK companies can participate. And because much of the UK space sector, the companies, large companies and small companies like my own, we're part of a larger European group, so it's relatively easy for work to be transferred to other parts of the different international companies. So,
have you seen any evidence of that happening thus far? Because of the uncertainty you've just referred to?
Yeah, anecdotally, I've heard of some of the larger space companies who are, from a risk mitigation point of view, putting contracts in other places because they know that's certain that can happen. If the contract was going to be led by the UK, there was uncertainty, so it's legitimate for those companies to take that risk avoidance strategy.
So the continued uncertainty is damaging to the sector?
Definitely, it's damaging right now, potentially more damaging in the future.
What we have seen on a number of occasions, on in particular some very high-profile recruitment, where we've not been successful, range of reasons given. Brexit has been mentioned in that, and one in particular, we think that uncertainty of portability of ERC funding was a major factor. We've also seen in a number of other live cases at the moment that they're moving rather slowly, and we, in some instances, feel that that is connected to uncertainty around Brexit.
Can I ask you the same question about funding in respect of Horizon 2020 that I asked Mr. Lawrence? Have you seen evidence that bids, people are anxious about including UK partners because they think it might have an adverse effect on the bid being successful?
Again, in overall terms, we're still applying and being successful,
okay.
But we have certainly seen one case of an individual effectively being excluded from a consortium, the reason being that great uncertainty about access to equipment if there was a UK partner in that. We've also seen a number of instances of people who've put in grants to the ERC which have been thrown out of the first round, which, given the quality of the research grant and given past experience, was unexpected.
Why would there be a problem in an individual here in the UK having access to equipment? Is this equipment in another EU member state?
Yeah, that sort of a part of that is located in the UK, and others can't come in to get easy access to that equipment.
I guess I'd focus on the people side of things.
Yep.
Two aspects of that. You've been around the campus and seen today we have a very large growing facility on the campus. We've recruited 1,000 people into Cambridge in the last 3 years. 300 of them are non-UK nationals. So that's a great success. And I guess our concern is the ability to continue to be able to have a diverse workforce, because technology and innovation requires that diversity of thinking. And the ability to be able to recruit global talent into the UK is critical to that. And then the second area would be about, again, about people, but actually about patients. So our biggest concern at the moment is post-Brexit, when we leave, we will no longer have access to the EU markets unless we can get our products validated and quality controlled within an EU country, and we don't actually have the time to do that. So patients will not be able to get their treatments as a consequence of that.
So how are you preparing as a company for the potential worst outcome? We obviously hope for something better in respect of certifying of new medicines, testing and those kind of things.
And so we don't know what the outcome is going to be,
Yeah.
but even an intermediate outcome may not be that great for us. It really comes down to patients and patient safety. So you've got to make sure that every time you manufacture a batch of drug, that it is safe, that it's like the previous batch and has all those characteristics. So what we've done now, we set up some parallel testing in our Swedish site of drugs which are being manufactured in the UK, sending them over to Sweden, and then we have to completely replicate the processes for validation and quality control of those products.
That is if the agreement couldn't be reached, in which the EU would say, it's okay, we will continue to recognise the testing and validation you've done in the UK, even though you're no longer a member of the EU.
To an extent, yes. So it is all down to the regulatory process.
Yeah.
So if we had complete harmonisation of the regulatory processes, then post-Brexit, as long as the EMA and the MHRA had harmonised processes in, that's fine.
And presumably you would want us, if it were possible, to continue to participate in the EMA?
Yes.
Very clear. Thank you very much indeed. Professor Hannon.
So first, apologies for my voice. It's going to be a bit of a struggle. I think that what I'd like to do is echo and expand on a couple of the points made so far. I think from the perspective of this institute and from the perspective of cancer research in the Cambridge area, I think people is really the most important thing. Being part of the larger European intellectual environment is a huge boon to UK science. And we heard the percentages of EU staff, and I'm sorry, from Professor Farron, at around 23%. In fact, that's almost exactly the percentage of EU staff in the Institute, but it's hugely skewed. So if you look at our technical and scientific staff, it's closer to 45% are European. And that's true at the PhD student level. That's true as people train beyond their PhD. And it's a little bit lower percentage at the level of the senior staff, the group leaders. But still, it's an enormous, enormous percentage, and we benefit from the exchange, from the scientific expertise that these people bring in from other institutes in Europe. Equally, we see migration of UK scientists outside the UK to train in Europe, and many of those then return, bringing back unique expertise. Being part of the Horizon 2020 funding scheme, the ERC funding scheme, is also critically important to us. Currently, this building has £10 million in ERC funding, but it's actually the impact of this goes substantially beyond the funding itself, because it's being integrated into these large cutting-edge projects as partners with our European colleagues. It is so important. If we want to be part of these consortia that push the very cutting edge of science, we need to be fully integrated into the EU community. Finally, another concern for my clinical colleagues is their ability to participate seamlessly in clinical trials. There are partnerships that already exist within the EU. For example, Cancer Core Europe is a consortium of 6 institutions spread across 6 different European countries that has diagnosed 60,000 new cases of cancer and is carrying out, as part of that consortium, 1,500 separate clinical trials. And for a lot of diseases, again, accessing patient populations is critical, and it's very clear why that's important for what one might call rare diseases. But if we look at cancer, as cancer becomes increasingly classified as a molecular disease, you don't just have breast cancer, and you no longer just have a subtype, for example, of breast cancer. You have a particular molecular configuration. And finding sufficient numbers of patients, and I'm sure that AstraZeneca could comment further on this, but having sufficient numbers of patients to bring into those trials needs a large population. And so I think we need to be concerned at all of those levels and put into place policies that allow free movement of our scientific colleagues, access not only to the funding but to scientific partnerships within Europe, and to ensure that we participate in pan-European clinical trials.
That's very helpful. Now, it has been said by some that if we don't get the right arrangements, particularly in relation to the certification and validation approval of new medicines, that they may come on stream in the UK later than in the rest of the EU, and we can look at other countries around the world where there is some delay. Is that a view that you share, or a concern that you have if we don't get the right arrangements?
Yep, a view that's shared by my clinical colleagues in the Institute. Right. And you know, that would be a direct impact on patients, particularly those patients being treated in the most innovative and cutting-edge ways.
Right. And Dr. Williams?
I think that's the pragmatic answer. You're going to go for a market with 500 million before you go to the market with 50 million. But in addition to that, of course, we have manufacturing going on in the UK, and it will be difficult to justify further investment in manufacturing in the UK if we then can't use those products within the European setting as well. So at the moment, we've stopped additional investment within our Northwest manufacturing facility until we have greater clarity about how that will work moving forward.
So in that respect, what you're also saying is that it could jeopardise our role and our leadership in space sector in the future, yeah, even if we stay in close relationship with the ESA.
Yes, yes.
And
I mean, it's absolutely essential. We're a key member of the European Space Agency, and we are at the moment, and the government in recent years has increased its commitment to the European Space Agency. However, that isn't the only answer, that isn't the only issue. We have to be part of the EU policy making in space, and the EU is a big user of space systems. It's the space policy of the EU is developing all the time. As I mentioned, space surveillance and tracking is the next big program coming along after the navigation and the Earth observation programs. So that's where the research focus will be driven from the EU space policy, and ESA will respond to that, and the ESA member states can take part in those research programs, but they could be restricted from taking part in the delivery of those programs if there's an EU policy issue that means non-EU members can't participate.
Just out of interest, have you done any assessment of what the cost might be in terms of both time and resource, opportunity cost, and financially, of having to create a separate regulatory regime for the UK, or to somehow disentangle us from the currently sort of deeply intertwined UK-EU regulatory regimes? Have you, in the scenario planning that you've done, I'm just wondering if there's any tangible definition of what that actual cost would be in tangible terms?
It is difficult to do. The first thing we're asking for is certainty to know what the future relationship is going to be. So we know some basic building blocks, like you need to establish a lab starting off establishing a lab in the EU, which can do GCP and GXP type activities. But until we have that certainty, so business is very good at this. Tell us what the rules are, and we'll go and figure out how to do them. There is only so much you can do theoretically until you know what the rules are.
So I've been informed by my policy advisor that CR UK is actually commissioning research in this area to really try to calculate what the financial impacts would be. But I think you brought up a really important point on opportunity cost. And you know, I guess I keep harping on this, but you know, it is the opportunity to participate in the EU intellectual environment and in the EU clinical environment that is absolutely critical and that has to continue. But there's also financial opportunities. So there are clinical trials that are happening on this site which gather significant European funding. So there's also going to be a cost associated with the loss of those. There's a particular breast cancer trial that would not have happened without 1.6 million euros in European funding. And so we have costs associated not only with the establishment of a different regulatory network, but we have opportunities that will be lost and trials that we just won't participate in.